This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Moonbase 3, episodes 1 and 2.
My conscience is clear. Dr. Smith knew the proper procedure quite well. Everything was correct.
Correct. So correct that you let Dr. Ransom sign his own death warrant. Can't any of you understand what I'm trying to say? The people on this base have put their lives into your hands. Nothing less than total concern will do.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast in orbit. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
Stop acting like a hysterical schoolgirl.
I won't. I will. You can't make me.
Do you remember that line?
I don't. There's a lot of good 70s specific gender lines in this.
It's always like there's like one designated female character in these shows, and you're like, oh, they made her a doctor, as they always do. Like, is she going to get some respect? Not really.
Absolutely not. Is she the person whose job is to take care of all of the mental health of everyone on Moonbase? Yes. Does anyone listen to her or like her? No.
Yeah. I know. It's like it's the old like Deanna Troi character. There's just very little to do anything with it, you know.
We're gonna jump ahead for a second because this line doesn't really matter. But like, there was one of my favorite in that it was such an insane line. Was that's her job? Is this woman's job is to take care of the mental health of people on the moon who are in a very stressful situation, who have to rely on each other to stay alive, which is like theoretically does seem and is postulated in the show to be one of the most important roles in the ship, and. The deputy director says that he can't be expected to listen to her since he can't run a moon base based on a, quote, woman's fancies.
That's what I mean. It's just they're so dismissive.
And it's like, you can absolutely run this base based on her recommendations. You actually should be running them based on her recommendation.
Well, like you guys, even like in World, you've hired her. You like her credentials. You like the person. You like the work she does. You're like, but you're still not going to listen to her.
So funny. Anyway, we're watching a new show this week, Moonbase 3. It was a BBC Fox series.
Weird, huh?
From 1973. And of course, in classic BBC style fashion, they lost the entire show after they aired it.
I saw that, and they found like one producer had a copy or something.
It was Fox. Fox just had a copy in their archives. It's so funny. What is wrong with the BBC exactly?
Clearly, it was just a thinking at that time of like, no one wants this. There's no idea that like, you know, people retroactively are going to want to watch these shows. So like, whatever, just get rid of them. It's
very hard. It's like, when are we ever going to need to fill time on television? Just delete.
Yeah. What was the other one that was deleted?
It was It's going to come back to me in a second, but it was another BBC one. It
wasn't Star Cops, was it?
No, it wasn't Star Cops. It was similar era. I cannot remember. I want to call it Mad World, but that's not at all what it was called. But it was Danger Team, Danger Quest, Future.
Don't look at me. You know I'll never remember. Is that one? Yes, Future Damage Team. I like it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not coming back to me. It'll come back to me in an hour. But yeah, very funny, very funny. Had you heard of this show before?
No. I mean, we'll talk about this. It, in some ways, feels like I've watched this show before because I felt it was very similar to another show we watched, which I just mentioned, which was Star Cops. It has a very, if not the same kind of show, it has a similar kind of pacing and tone to it. Would you agree?
Yeah, it definitely is coming at it from a similar thing where it's just like it's an ultra realistic sci-fi space drama where they're like, what would it be like if we had people working permanently in space? And that was very much Star Cops kind of milieu as well. So yeah, definitely a straight line there, I would say.
I tell you what it would be like. Well, one thing's for sure, they wouldn't be listening to a woman.
I watched, I don't know if you ever saw this, there was a sci-fi comedy like maybe 5 years ago, maybe, I hate to say it, maybe more, with Tim Heidecker called Moonbase 8, where him
I don't know of it.
John C. Reilly were just scientists on a moon base doing work, and there was also I think there might have also been a Chinese moon base. It was pretty good actually, better than this.
Well, I mean, if that hasn't wet people's whistle for this show.
Well, the show ran from September 9th to October 14th, 1973. Well, the show was on in 1973. We didn't watch anything, but we have watched 3 TV movies from 1973. You want to guess? You want to guess what the 3 TV movies we've watched from the same era is?
What was that Western one? That Western horror, was that one?
No, it was not. High Noon? Low Noon?
Yeah. I can't remember what the name of it is. Sorry, it's brutal.
We're having a tough time today.
The two of us?
Just can't remember a name to anything.
Good thing you and I don't need to listen to this. The tripods, and that was a series. What about
one more?
Cold Night's Death?
A Cold Night's Death is correct. You got one. 1 of 3. Pretty good. There were Genesis 2.
Oh, Genesis 2.
And The Stranger.
Oh yeah. That's the one where he has to pretend to be someone else and trick his wife?
No,
I always mix that one up.
No, you're thinking of the astronaut one. No, I can't remember the name of anything today. Jesus. Yeah. No, that one is about there's an Earth on the opposite side of the sun to our Earth, so we never see it's there.
Oh,
and he's an astronaut who lands on that Earth accidentally.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. I remember it fondly. I don't remember if I actually liked it at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that was fun.
I don't think it was very good. I think the best part of it was the helicopter stunts that clearly endangered the lives of several stuntmen.
That's right. I remember it now, yeah.
Anyway, let's get into this episode. Here's the IMDb summary for Episode 1, Departure and Arrival. Astronaut Harry Sanders suffers a mental breakdown while piloting a shuttle from the moon back to Earth, causing an accident that kills him and his passenger, Moonbase 3 director Tony Ransom. Under political pressure to close the moon base following the deaths, the Director General of the European Space Program appoints David Calder to take over as director of Moonbase 3 and investigate the accident. And that summary was courtesy of Gus F.
I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. I'll say a couple things. This, I don't know if we mentioned, this is supposed to take place in 2003.
Yeah, right.
Which is crazy for a couple ways. One, that, obviously in 1973, 2003 seemed quite a long ways away, and now we are quite a ways away in the opposite direction from 2003, which is bizarre. I like that no one was listening to the Strokes or the White Stripes in this. It's 2003. Come on, guys.
You guys, we're playing on all the radio.
But the one other thing, weird thing I want to mention, because we had said that this is a little bit like Star Cops. I was like, oh yeah, I wonder Star Cops. And I went and I looked back, and then I saw that the actor who playing the lead in Star Cops, you know what his name is?
David Calder, right?
David Calder. Isn't that bizarre?
When they announced his name was David Calder on the show, the guy who was coming to be the lead character, I was like, I know that name. But it's weird because it's not like it's the actor's name, it's the character's name. I do think that was a nod to the show. I feel like the show maybe was not successful, might have inspired some other things going forward.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Anyways, it was just a weird little thing of two rather obscure shows that we watched, and they both had that same name. I was like, oh, that's odd. But anyways, we open on Moonbase 3. It's sort of like a space station. How did you feel about the sort of the look of this? Like, obviously you said it's very realistic. Clearly, like, the moon parts are shot on a stage. I thought for the most part it looks pretty good for like something that is clearly low budget.
Yeah, I think the 70s miniature work is good. I think the sets are pretty good, actually. They're like pretty good sets, both interiors and exteriors. When they're walking the moon, I think they did a good job like making the moon look like sandy and moon-like and very desolate. I was pretty happy, actually. I think aesthetically, I'm like, the show looks actually pretty good.
Yeah, I like I'm glad you mentioned the interior. I kind of like the interior too. It actually reminded me of how much I hate modern sci-fi interiors, because everything looks like a place you couldn't actually work with, like no lighting and then like lens flares and anything. But this, like, I looked and I was like, oh, this is actually a feasible place you could work. Yeah. Like, it's not exactly warm, but it looks like an office in space.
They definitely put a lot of time and effort into making the exact show they wanted. I feel like they put a lot of time and effort, and it shows in the production design for sure. Just to set the stage, obviously, this is a scientific research base. It's the European Union, essentially. Like, it's essentially the EU, but Brexit hasn't happened.
Yeah, and so...
Wait, in 2005, had Brexit happened yet?
No.
So it's accurate, perfectly accurate.
Yeah. So we will find out later on the show. This is Moonbase 3 is the base we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
There's Moonbase 1, which is an American one. There's Moonbase 2, which is Russians. Which is Moonbase 3 here, which you're saying is kind of European Union, but it seems mostly British. There is Moonbase 4, which is Chinese.
China. And man,
and then
5...
Didn't it throw you for a loop?
Dude, you could never in a million years have got me to guess who had Moonbase 5.
Hey, Brazil.
I was making notes. I was like, I'm sorry, Brazil has Moonbase? Just Brazil?
I was sure they were going to say India or I don't know. It just was like, I was like, oh, weird.
I mean, they've got their world powers down. Like, I mean, it's just like pretty accurate. And then they got it. And Moonbase 5. Maybe Brazil's going to pop off in 2005?
Yeah. Anyways, so we know there's at least 5 moon bases on the moon.
Yes.
All sort of, they're connected, but not really. Like they're in contact with one another. That they're all kind of doing their own separate experiments for their own separate governments.
Yeah. They're very siloed. They work for their governments, but they all talk to each other essentially.
Yeah.
But the pilot kicks off by introducing us to kind of the lead characters who are going to be on the show. There's Dr. Michel Lebrun, the French character. He's the deputy director, kind of second in command. He's
your token French character.
He's a bit of the Spock, I would say, of the show. He's like real by the book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's
Dr. Helen Smith. She's British, and she's the psychologist we mentioned earlier, who's there to monitor everyone's like mental state and then get harassed by everybody.
And disregarded, yeah. And we've said this before, though. Isn't it insane how many shows we've seen from the 70s, whether it's English or American or what have you, they'll make the female character a doctor, but it's like for no real reason. It's amazing.
They really could not deal with feminism back then, could they?
Yeah.
And then there's Tom Hill, who's also British, and he's the director of operations. He's, I guess, a bit like your Scotty or something. He's just there to like run the base. He's kind of like a blue collar guy. He's not a doctor, so he's there to kind of keep things operating. Mm-hmm. And the director of the station is getting ready to return to Earth with his favorite pilot because he's got to go deal with some expense reports and keep the base operational. Your favorite thing.
Yeah, but you know what I like, though, is that it's the future. And I thought about this. I'm like, because he has to go do stuff. I'm like, there's got to be ways. They're on the moon. There's got to be ways to send stuff over that he doesn't need to go down to Earth. Do they throw a line of dialogue that I missed? Why they're explaining why he had to go to Earth?
No, I think what it is they have some sort of understanding of future technology, but they are not predicting it all perfectly because he basically gets on the ship to fly back, and he's literally leafing through papers. He's got all this loose leaf paper he's going through. I'm just like, why would he have all that loose leaf paper on this this ship? It's insane. And later in the episode, when our new director comes, and spoiler alert, the new director David Calder shows up. He's asking to see. He's like, "Can you please send the staff reports to me as soon as you can?" And one of the characters points like, "Oh, they're just on your computer over there." He's like, "Oh, neat. Things on a computer. I'll play with that later." And I'm just like, "You guys are in space. What do you mean, neat? A computer?"
Yeah, and it's like you would assume that the space station. They don't really tell us geographically how large it is, but you'd assume space is at a premium. So having stacks of paper, even just like having to like deal with it, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's got to be a huge filing room for someone.
Yes. But regardless, it kind of starts us off because he wants to go, and you get a sense right away. I don't know if it's that we see the pilot acting funny at first or we hear about it. I think it's actually Helen brings it up before we actually see him, that she's like, it's not that he's failed a psychological test, but they mentioned that I guess they go through these tests quite often and to test their mental capabilities and the stress they're under because they're under this larger amount of stress than normal on the moon. But is she the one that sort of brings it up that he, even though he's done well in his test, she sort of like something has in the back of her mind, she's like, something's not right.
Yeah, essentially that's what it is. She did a test. She's talked to him. He passed everything. He seems fine, but something just feels wrong about his current state of mind. But you can't like file a report because he didn't break any rules. But essentially, brings it to deputy director. Asks deputy director Michelle to go talk to the director and warn him. He doesn't really want to, but he does. The director's like, no, he's the best pilot on the moon. I don't really care. And we get a little bit, and the operations guy, Tom Hill, he's in the control room, and he's just like, seems a little edgy today on the intercom, and they're like, he passed all his exams, we'll just let him go. The idea being that everyone's kind of senses something's off, but like he hasn't done anything wrong, and the director is just like, he's the best pilot, he's my pilot, I'm taking him, I don't care what you all say.
And I think she even mentions like she thinks he should be grounded, and Michelle says like, you can't be grounded on a feeling. Which I think is a very, they both sort of have their point. But what I thought was funny is, though, one of the things she mentioned is that, like, she's worried he can't take criticism, and thus that's, like, a sign. And I was like, okay. It's weird that they have her raising what I think is a very valuable point, and even the idea of, like, something is wrong, but it's hard to
articulate.
Yeah, articulate what that is. But then they're like, he can't take criticism. And I was like, I think that's a bit of a stretch.
I would agree that I would say this is the biggest issue, is like that concept of just like, there's something wrong, it's a dangerous situation, how do you deal with it? It's like dry, but also probably pretty accurate to us all in the workplace. And then they're like, I think what it is, they're like, we need to explain what's wrong. And they spent all this time building a backstory about how he was like, orphan as a child, and as an orphan he strived to be the best.
He's too perfect. Yeah.
So he could be number one all the time. So as a result, he doesn't listen to other people very well because he needs to prove himself all the time, and that's now pushed him to the point where like he's not listening properly. And I'm just like, I just needed to know the guy like maybe wasn't like totally clicking because of the stresses. Like they write this insane backstory about this orphan who's fighting the man who's got a chip on his shoulder. It's like, none of this makes sense.
Well, it raises the point, and it's something I felt more so even in the next episode we're going to talk about, but it's on this episode as well. As the show's one, I think, criticism that I would have of it is that they have a little bit too much tell and not enough show. And something like that, I think you could have had a scene or two where you show, even though we're just introducing the character, that he's maybe a little bit irritable, or he's acting in a peculiar way, because you would get that across right away with a person acting way, as opposed to saying it. And even in the next episode, they'll keep saying these things are happening, but you never actually see it. And I don't know why that's the choice they've gone with. It's a little bit peculiar.
Well, the thing is, they do those scenes where he's just like, he's a little irritable waiting for the director to get out there for no reason. It's his job just to sit there and wait. Like, why is he so irritable? Like, they show those scenes, but then they like let's have 3 more scenes where we discuss his like backstory. I'm just like,
yeah.
And I'm like, I know this guy's not going to make it for the next 5 minutes, you guys. I don't need to know every single moment of his life. I just need to know he's like maybe in a bad state of mind, and you already did that for me. Again, a little bit of the writing, a little bit of the time period maybe, but essentially what happens is the director gets on the ship, they blast off, there's some solar interference coming through, so his nav system isn't updating, and the pilot, because he has this chip on his shoulder where he needs to like fix everything himself, ignores Moonbase, and it's like, I'm going to do a spacewalk and fix the satellite myself. Immediately severs his safety cable and just floats off into space.
Yeah. So now, none of that, I understand the whole thing, like he's a little bit stubborn and stuff. Like, I don't know if, again, the connection between doing something so wildly dangerous and being irritable or whatever, I don't know if that really works, but the whole point is just to set it up that this horrible accident has happened, possibly through complacency, I guess is what you would say, or possibly through a lack of communication, or possibly through several issues through the levels of command.
Yeah. People were too focused on being by the book, and as a result, they kind of saw it coming, but didn't do anything about it. And now old pilot boy's floating off into space, and the director's just like, okay, well, I'll just try to pilot the ship myself then. And there's still solar interference, so they can hear him, but he can't hear them. Yeah. He's like, I'm just gonna push this stick down here, and they're like, don't do that, you'll explode. He's like, pushing it down now. Whole ship explodes.
That was my favorite part of this episode, was that like they're like, okay, the one thing you do is like, this is not exactly what it was, but they're like, the one thing you're gonna do is don't turn it around and put your foot on the throttle. He's like, I'm gonna turn it down and put my foot on the throttle. They're like, okay, that's the one thing not to do. He's like, you got it, I'm doing it. And then and I was like, well, you saw that coming. And I like that. I didn't even catch what the director's name was, and I knew it didn't matter. I was like, just director. It's the director. He's dead now.
Yeah. It was pretty clear that these people were about to die, and hence this launches an investigation of Moonbase 3 and the installation of an outsider to become the new director. The very bearded scientist, academic, administration superstar, David Calder. He fixed the student uprising at Oxford.
Okay,
Right?
That was my favorite thing. Luke, I want to talk about. So he there was some sort of student protest. I'm going to assume a valid one because they don't say otherwise, but he was able to quash it. They're like, yeah, we like the look of that. Let's bring this guy up on a Moonbase. So if there's any sort of hinky business, he'll crush it.
So funny. The way they phrased it, at first they were like, well, he fixed the troubles. I'm like, the Irish troubles? Like, the troubles at Oxford. I'm like, oh, that's different.
But yeah, that was his main qualification. But yes, he comes up and
wait, Jordan, you're forgetting about the riveting committee vote where he's hired off a 1-to-1 vote with an abstention. It's 1-to-1 with an abstention. They're like, well, I'm the director, so I put my extra vote behind him, and he's hired. And I'm like, why am I watching any of this?
Well, yeah. Why did they do that? You would think they would have done a scene where it was like either one way, which it was like everyone votes for him, so you're like, oh, this guy's like the real deal. Or conversely, none of them vote for him, and you're like, oh, he's a bit of a renegade or something. But they're like, they give like a very, very realistic vote where one person wants him, another person doesn't, and then the third person's like, oh, well, my vote counts for 2. Anyways, I'm like, amazing.
Yeah, it was just watching Robert's rules in action, and even like there's the idea like one person's voting for him, one person's voting against him, so that Michelle can be the director. But like neither of them seem to care that much either way.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, anyways, he's voted in because this guy who has a mustache has tie-breaking abilities. So there you go, exciting.
Yeah. He arrives, and obviously the staff are immediately suspicious of him. They're worried, he's there to investigate. Who's going to get the blame for these deaths on the moon? Blah, blah, blah. And of course, the deputy director, Michelle, is also like, he's like, I wanted to be the director. I'm going to resign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wants to. He's sort of irritated, and he's saying it's because of whatever reason, but it's very clear he wanted to have the job. And Helen makes a very interesting point where she says, he's Dr. Helen, what's her last name? Helen Smith. And Michelle they're having the conversation, and she's like, you can't resign, because if you resign, it's going to look like you feel guilty about what happened, and not only that, it's going to then make all of us look guilty. So you have to take one for the team and just like suck it up.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, good point.
It's true. I mean, honestly, if you resign, they would shuffle all the blame onto you. It'd be so easy because you already quit.
Yeah, exactly. So he's kind of stuck in that position where he wants to. He doesn't like this new guy coming in, but it's also he's stuck there. And David comes in a very weird way, because I felt like he came in very amiable. Did you think he was just trying to like manipulate people a little bit by being like, I'm a pal?
I'm not sure. I think it is. We're supposed to think we should be cautious of him, but also I do think we're supposed to think he's like kind of a cool guy you want to hang out with, because like he's like, that's how he's sort of set up to, where he like solved all these problems. Like people like him, I guess, is the idea. Even though he's an outsider, he'll win them over with his charm and his beard.
Yeah, so he's come in, and he's basically, I guess he has a thing where he like compliments Tom on how one time he saved a cat or something in space.
He saved the cat, Jordan. He saved
I know,
the cat.
Literally
Classic
saved the cat.
screenwriting book.
But he basically says he wants to there should be an investigation into the death, and he's going to go through basically and speak to all the crew to try to law and order this thing.
Yeah. And they give him a tour of the station and all the research they're doing on the moon. We get to see a little bit of the ship. We get to see how it has a day-night cycle. It's a base, I guess. A day-night cycle. We see artificial gravity is on based on a sign they walk by, so no further questions.
Well, I had a question about that. So, seemingly this place has windows, right? Why did they have to create a day-night simulator? They can see the sun still, and I know the moon won't be on the exact rotation of day and night that Earth is on, but they're still going to see daylight, and it's not everywhere in the world has the same whatever it was, 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. So why couldn't they adjust to whatever the moon's?
Good question. Do they have windows?
I'm not sure. Yeah, now that I'm thinking, I don't know if I saw them. I saw the kind of weird goldy corrugated walls, but I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe they don't have any windows.
I mean, Dr. Smith talks about how it's sort of to like set up the circadian rhythms similar to Earth, which, I don't know. I think that's fine. That's like classic sci-fi stuff. But yeah, why? I don't know. Why not? And I mean, why is there a sign that just has artificial gravity on it? So that they can hand wave the fact that they're not quite walking moon-like. This Moonbase is more an explanation for like, things are not quite correct, but like, here's why.
Yeah. And I think this is when I think there's one little call I like because he calls Moonbase 1 David, our which is seemingly going to be our lead, and he calls this guy, and I laugh because the guy's an American, but it's clearly a British actor doing an American accent, and I just really enjoyed it. Yeah, and he gets like 85% of the words with an American accent, but there's a couple in there I'm like, that's a little posh.
He's certainly not the best actor on the team, but I think that makes him my favorite part whenever it comes on. He always is delivering the lines in kind of like the most weird way possible. I love it. I love him so much. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it next week. There's a line he does next episode that I was just like, this is the best line read I've ever heard.
That's funny.
But essentially, yeah, Calder is going to investigate everybody, looks at the crew things on his computer, the crew reports, and comes very quickly to a conclusion that essentially all three of the senior officers, LeBlanc, Smith, and Hill, all bear responsibility for the two deaths.
Oh, and let me just cut in with one really dumb little side thing. He, at one point, irritates Michelle by saying that he wants to change all the meetings to 10 minutes because he wants to be really efficient. And I loved it. I have had this conversation with people at work, and no one is behind it, that there's a couple things I want to institute with meetings, which is, one, most meetings we all should just be standing up and not sitting down, and meetings should start at 15 minutes, and we can extend them with 15 minutes depending on what the meeting is, so 15 or 30. The fact that so many meetings are set to be an hour is insane to me. But anyways, when I heard him saying, like, we only need 10 minutes to go over this, I was like, David, you're winning me over, my friend.
Smashing the table. Yes.
I'm like, I got more ideas how to be more efficient. Let's talk.
And essentially, he said that these three bear responsibility for the two deaths because of what we've already sort of stated. They've all kind of saw the issue coming, but just followed the rules, and as a result, allowed the deaths to happen. They suit up in their very cool red and yellow spacesuits. I like their little red and yellow spacesuits.
Yeah, I liked it too.
Climb on a ship to head back for a tribunal on Earth to their behavior. And it's very funny because this is mentioned very early on when David comes in. Like, he's also bringing his own pet pilot, but they're like, let's go back to Earth with David's pet pilot that he brought with him. And it was like, what a telegraphing of something.
Yeah.
And as they're flying away, there's an explosion in the cryo tanks of the ship, and they have to make an emergency landing on the moon. And they now only have a half an hour of oxygen left to try to walk to a nearby science outpost in the hopes of surviving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you get a bit of a like a spacewalk. Again, looks pretty good. Looks one would assume it looks like walking on the moon with the dust and such. I don't know if there was as much tension here as they had wanted. Like, I didn't think at any point.
No, I didn't really. My favorite part was they're like, we need to climb to the top of that ridge and see if we can see an outpost somewhere nearby. And then Michelle goes, if we don't, and then someone turns around and says, shut up. I'm like, what? Shut up.
Don't worry, they're going to make it.
Shut up.
I hope Helen didn't hear that. She'd be like, guys, that's not good workplace behavior. And they'd be like, shut up.
There, of course, is no outpost when they get to the top of the ridge, and they only have 5 minutes of air left. And they're like, well, that's it. We're all dying on the moon. And then a moon rover from the U.S. Moonbase 1 pulls up, and they're all saved.
Yeah.
And we cut back to the Moonbase 3, and Calder reveals that it was all just some sort of mind game he was playing on them to make them see that the moon is a hostile environment and they need to be nice to each other.
Yeah. So I have a couple things that I have a problem with it. One is, like, I think there hadn't been evidence really, and I hadn't seen anything in their behavior, even in his interviews that we kind of skimmed over quick, that anybody took anything lightly. I don't think they did. There was perhaps an error in judgment, or people didn't, a communication breakdown of some sort, but you never got a sense that someone was sort of being like willy-nilly with the rules or something like that, you know? And so I don't know if his lesson makes a lot of sense. And worse, this is like, it sort of reminded me of like the old, like that running gag on Arrested Development, where the dad would always have that guy have his arm fall off to teach the kids a lesson,
right,
you know,
right.
And that's why you don't do this. It was like, this seems like you're really, you know, beating them over the head with this lesson. And I don't know if it's done in the best way, because like, you'd be like, I would never trust this person again. You imagine actually thinking you're a couple minutes away from death. You have to have that moment within yourself, that introspection, that the whatever those feelings are that would come up, come upon yourself, and then be like, just joking. I'd be like, I'm gonna kill you. like it's just like it's so and it's also so vastly and wildly inappropriate for a boss to do this to make a point. I was like, that seems way worse than anything they did.
Is this, do you think, how he put down the student uprisings at Oxford? He like came in with a gun and held it to someone's head, and they're like, just kidding, it's empty.
Everyone's got post-traumatic stress now. It's like, I don't know what point you're making.
It was very weird. I was like, this is the craziest thing to do. You're right. No one was not taking it seriously. It seems like there was just an issue, and they needed to look at their procedures and the chain of command to have a better thing, because this problem led from chain of command and procedures.
I can tell you, all they really needed to do was, if you have a doctor on board, a psychologist or whatever she is, her specialty, she should have the authority to ground someone if she deems it necessary. That's it. That's what we've learned from this whole thing, that she wanted to ground the person, but the director held power over, and he said no. He's like, well, it should be in a medical emergency or a psychological emergency or whatever it may be, that she just can say, you're grounded. That's it. That's the problem. You don't need to take everyone out to space and pretend they're dying.
Yeah,
like,
there was definitely other solutions for sure. It really was a weird introduction. But he brings them back. He tells them it was all a hilarious prank he pulled, and that all their jobs are actually safe. He's decided he's just going to blame the whole thing on the dead director. The end.
Yeah, that's it. And you're like, oh, okay.
Weird management style. Probably illegal.
Yeah, it was a weird introduction. I'll say this: I think it was pretty efficient how fast they went through this. Like, it wasn't like they belabored the points of the interviews or anything like that. Like, there wasn't a time where I was like, "Oh, this is dragging." It's just that the result of all of it seems to not really make the point they were trying to make. So I was just like, okay. I don't know if David is the genius you guys are saying he is.
In theory, I think the theme of it and the lesson to set up the show is an interesting one. The idea that space is so harsh and like only cooperation will keep us alive out there is an interesting theme for, like, you could tell a lot of stories around that theme in a space-based TV show. But this is how they chose to execute it, is like bananas.
Yeah, which I think is a great lead to episode 2, Behemoth, because I would argue there's a very similar sort of idea, and how it's executed, I don't know if those two things coalesce.
Well, here's the IMDb summary for episode 2, Behemoth.
I'm worried about Heinz Labenthal.
Huh?
Well, on his last testing session, his personality profile showed a considerable stress peak.
That one's down to me, I'm afraid. He wants to work in Mare Frigoris, and I won't let him.
There's quite a bit of speculation going around as to the disappearance of Zeman and Lecoy.
Well, that's naturally. Surely we're a relatively small community.
There seems to be a feeling that something odd, unexplained, happened in Mare Frigoris.
Not much we can do about that, Helen. It happens to be the truth.
When two seismologists mysteriously vanish in the Try that again. When two seismologists mysteriously vanish in the Mare Frigoris region, definitely didn't get it right, Calder bans all travel to the area, a decision that upsets Dr. Heinz Lubenthal, who is conducting research in the area but won't reveal what he is working on. And that truncated summary is courtesy of Gus F.
Yeah. This episode shows us like that there are different departments, I'll say for lack of a better word, that are all sort of working on their own isolated experiments on the moon, and the director's sort of above it. But what's weird is that they seem almost more autonomous than one would think, don't you think?
They're definitely not required to make a lot of reports to the director or each other.
Yeah, and that was weird to me, because we just came off an episode where, I'm not saying communication was the only issue, but it seemed like there was some sort of chain of command problems with how this death happened. Yet you have an entire base where people don't really report to each other. It's like, that seems pretty dangerous if you've just made the point how dangerous the moon can be, yet you have people doing who knows what experiments. I was like, that seems weird.
Maybe this is just the next day and they haven't had a chance to put any new policies in place.
Yeah, maybe.
But it does open with some pretty good moon special effects. We see these guys setting up equipment on the moon in this area, and there's like a crazy moonquake where they like the sand. I don't know how they do that ripple in the sand, but it looks pretty good. And like these guys get sucked down into the moon quicksand, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, it's not good. Whatever happens, not good.
And these two scientists and their equipment completely vanish, which, of course, the commander on Moonbase 1, Jackson, who we mentioned last episode, the American commander, who you believe is a British man putting on an American accent,
Yes.
they call him to tell him, and the Moonbase man commander on the video call points out, hey, that's bad.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, they're like, we lost 2 men out there, and all the equipment vanished. And he's like, long pause, hey, that's bad. I'm like, okay.
I mean, he's right.
He's
It's
right.
Not good.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Favorite line read of the entire episode, possibly the show. And Calder restricts the area till they can figure out what happened. And this, of course, upsets the dead scientist's pointlessly secretive team lead, the German Dr. Heinz Liebenthal.
Yeah, so that was going to be my point on this. Is so there's this a couple things happening in this episode. Really what you're going to have is what they sort of coin as hysteria that sort of starts happening within the ship. Again, we'll talk about, I don't think they show it enough, at least for me. They talk about it a lot, that how quick sort of rumors can spread and how they can expand without any real evidence-based information. That's the one thing happening. But the other thing is that there's this science team that are doing these experiments that they don't want to talk about. And when they are like, oh, well, tell us what you guys are doing, and then we'll be able to know if this is something we should keep doing or not. They're like, well, we can't tell you. And they're like, why? They're like, we can't tell you. It's like, well, I don't know if being obtuse helps the situation at all.
It's so funny because Heinz is basically, people keep coming to me like, what are you working on? Your 2 guys died out there. He even seems to have an assistant who's just like, what were we doing out there? Like, he works in the same department.
Yeah.
He's like, my research isn't complete yet, so I don't want to tell you until it's complete. I'm like, you can't walk around. And he's like, nope, can't say a word about what I'm doing. Not even a clue.
Yeah, and I get why they do it, because it keeps the mystery to the end of the episode. But it was just like one of those things. I'm like, I would have done the same thing Calder did. It's like, yeah, you can't do your experiment then. You don't want to tell me about it? You can't do it. And he's like, why I oughta? I'm like, it's perfectly reasonable.
Truly. Throughout the episode, there's a bunch of interpersonal stuff with the executive staff. There is some like fallout from Calder like faking killing them. They do seem to be
Tom.
quite annoyed. Tom is. Michelle still doesn't really like him. There still seems to be a little. It's not really done to any great effect, but I did appreciate there still seems to be like, we don't really like you that much.
Yeah, there was one scene I really liked. It's later in the episode where Tom, I think he's like you said, he's like sort of the engineer or something like that on board. And David are having a conversation, and David's like, you're being kind of cold to me. And Tom's like, yeah, do you remember when you tried killing us like a couple days ago? Yeah, I'm still pretty irritated about that. I was like, yeah, well played, Tom. I agree with you.
So this is sort of happening as they're trying to figure out what happened to these people and showing this area, this moon. And then Dr. Heinz's lab on the moon base decompresses. Essentially, the wall appears to have been bashed in from the outside, and Heinz was torn to pieces.
Yeah, and sorry, that's sort of what starts the rumors, because someone, I don't know who says it or where it came from, but there's sort of an implication that maybe it was an alien, because it seems like something almost attacked the ship is what it looks like. And like, could it be an alien? Is that something that we've seen, or could what they were working on have awoken something? That's sort of what kind of starts these rumors.
Well, yeah, the mystery is missing astronauts who they can't find, and now this unusual decompression that looks like something came from the outside. They even find a strange trail leading from the lab off toward that restricted moon area, and they're like, what's happened? And then they find out that Heinz has been ignoring the ban and just going out to the restricted area to continue his research anyway. So the rumors of a moon monster spread. They're even getting calls from the U.S. and Chinese moon bases being like, what's all this about a moon monster?
Yeah, I liked when the Chinese base called, and they're just like, hey, you can't do that. We don't want to hear rumors from you guys. You can't do that anymore. This is a real problem. And he just told them, he's like, you can't do it. Sorry.
Sorry. We view moon monsters as propaganda, and we don't want them. Yeah. We don't want these moon monsters.
Exactly.
And then after about 40 minutes of the episode, they finally head out to investigate the moon monster.
Yeah, it's because, again, I think they're trying to show almost in real time how a rumor can spread. and take on sort of its own form. But it's, again, I would have liked to have seen more scenes where like you almost see that organically happen. What they do is there's a lot of like people just keep mentioning like, oh, we're worried about this hysteria. And it's like, it just feels like we kind of go over the same ground over and over and over. And I know where we're getting to, but you're right. Like it takes quite a long time to finally kind of get anywhere.
Yeah, and they head out to look at the moon monster, but while they're gone, there's been this one scientist who throughout the episode has, for reasons we don't understand, because I don't even really know who he is or what his characteristics are or what his job is, but this one scientist on the station, on the moon base, has been riling up the fears of the moon monster. Like, he's just like, moon monster. He doesn't really believe it, but he's just having fun. It's like he's having fun scaring people.
I don't think it's so much that. It's like he's like that kind of person, and I'm sure we've all met people like this. You know, the person who likes like getting in debates just because they really like debating, and it's one of those things where you're like, I don't want to be at this party where I hear this guy like arguing about philosophy. It's just like it's like, you think that? It's like, oh, you're so.
Yeah, he doesn't believe anything he's saying. He just wants to do it.
He just wants to, like create a problem, and they're just like, can you not? And he's like, nah, I got to.
And this guy, finally, after they've left to investigate the moon monster, quite deep into the, like, there's maybe 10 minutes of the episode, he starts looking at Heinz's research, and he, like, starts investigating what Heinz is working on, reading his papers, and he realizes what really happened. He's like, oh, no, I know what's actually happened out on the restricted area, and he races out to save the moon monster investigation team, and it turns out it was a shifting layer of permafrost, which is revealed in the dramatic way where he pulls someone out from getting sucked down by a moon quicksand, and then in the sand he writes ice in big letters. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that was weird. And I the thing was, I knew at the beginning of this episode when it started that
it was never gonna be a moon monster.
It wasn't going to be a moon monster, and I don't know if even a moon monster would have been like it wouldn't have fit with this kind of show. Like, do I want to see a moon monster? Oh yes, I do. But I don't think that's this show, and it would have seemed like anachronistic to have it here.
It would be so funny if the first episode was about Robert's rules and like administration, and the second episode was about a moon monster.
Right, but I knew it was going to be disappointing. And it felt like you're waiting the whole episode to be disappointed, and then I wasn't, because I was like, oh, permafrost. Okay.
Oh,
thanks, guys.
You weren't disappointed?
No. I wasn't disappointed in that I knew I was going to be disappointed.
Yeah, perfect. Essentially, they're like, the explosives Heinz was using in his research caused something to shift in the permafrost, which was quicksand to the astronauts at the start. Then he was so secretive that he didn't tell anyone that he had less powerful explosives made to do more of his research, but those explosives blew him up in his lab. So it wasn't punched in from the outside. It just makes sense. Like, it would look like it exploded from the inside then. Like, I don't quite understand how that works.
I think what they tried to how they talked around it was that the explosion happened, and then because it depressurized, it like pulled the ship in. Like, I don't know the physics of that so it worked, but I think that's how they were trying to talk around it, of this, like, how did it look like it blew inside? It was due to the depressurization. And then
the trail of the moon monster we found outside, that was just something random outside that our imaginations ran wild with. I was like, okay, cool, thanks for explaining that.
Well, that's the thing. It's always kind of disappointing when it's not like they did a great job of setting up this, like, how could this possibly happen? But it's disappointing when you set up a mystery, and the mystery is something either kind of lame or something you couldn't have solved because they just hand wave details away. Well, it's like, well, then I don't know how good that mystery was, you know?
Yeah. Anyway, this is like the last minute of the episode. They give this explanation for all of this, and then they finish the explanation for the mystery, and they're like, anyway, ice on the moon is great news for science, so I guess this is a win. Like, what?
I like that.
Sorry, Heinz and other scientists. This is a win.
Yeah. I mean, shouldn't have been so secretive.
That's just it. And that's the end of the episode 2. Well, Jordan, do you have any final notes, or do you want to get to ratings?
Yeah, and there's one final thing, I guess, and it's interesting when you watch some of these things. And again, I know the kind of show they're trying to make, and it's interesting when you see a science fiction show like this, because I think we would kind of agree, and maybe you won't agree, that at least in Western culture, there's two really big cultural sci-fi shows or movies that we all kind of know of. It's the two, it's Star Wars and Star Trek. Those are kind of the two big ones, and so everything kind of falls from there in varying degrees. Now, this isn't trying to be like either of those. But I think there's a bit of a fault there in some way. Not that this has to be like Star Trek: The Next Generation, or it has to be like even like Star Wars, but like there's like a fun and adventure with Star Wars, and I get why people like that, because it's fun and it's explosions and it's fun characters getting stuck in situations, and they're, you know, and Star Trek had this sort of, you know, this wonder and investigation and this sort of majesty of space and what could be out there. And this show is sort of like, because they don't really want to fall in either of those camps, and again, not that they have to, there's this, and I understand this could be a weird criticism, it's that it's almost overly serious to the point where you're like, guys, you're in space, like you could have like a little bit of enjoyment, you know what I mean, like have like a little bit of fun. And it's like, it's so self-serious that it's like, guys, like you could have like, I just some sense, I hate to say it, but like some sense of wonder of what you guys are doing, as opposed to like, what if it was like a bureaucratic office and everyone was really unhappy and they did paperwork? I'm like, yeah, I guess then, but like, why are you on the moon? I don't know. You know?
Yeah, it's trying to be really, really grounded, and it's attempting to use the, like, especially the danger of space as its dramatic engine, but it's so grounded. It's so much about just like procedure that like, it is so dry. It is so dry.
Yeah. And to finish my point, it's like, the two examples I had of Star Wars and Star Trek, it's like, I think they're the biggest examples because of what they are, and for good measure. And I think when you I think you said it for the beginning. It's like, this is the show they're wanting to make for better or worse.
Sure, for
you
sure.
You can feel it. You can feel that like everyone is really invested, which is nice. It's just that it's not the most thrilling time to have.
It's a misstep, I think. I think they are nailing exactly what they were hoping to do, but it's quite clear that just there's not enough to sustain drama within that context. Like, they don't have anything to really get excited about for us as the viewer. Like, here's the thing: I don't mind a grounded space thing. I like Star Cops quite a bit. Like, it was just a cop show in space, but very grounded space. This is what this is missing. Is it's just like, this is like Star Cops, but if you just didn't attach cop show to it, you're just like, what if it were just Space Office? Like, you need to like attach something to Space Office. You need another thing attached to that.
Yeah. So in saying that, I would give the first episode. I always think for the first episode of pilot, I'll be generous, because you hope that it's going to go somewhere, and you don't want to kill it from the beginning. So I'm going to give the first one a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. A very generous score, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I thought this one would be right up my alley. It's hitting a lot of like check boxes that should work for me. It is just dry, man. It's like eating a saltine. It's a slog. It's not very entertaining. The episodes are 50 minutes long. Our podcast on 2 of these episodes is now less than one episode of that show. Like, there's nothing really happens, but they go on for eternity. I have to go 4, I think, for the pilot.
Okay.
What about Behemoth?
Yeah, Behemoth I liked less. Again, I'm still trying to be a little bit nice to the show. I found it a little bit frustrating watching this. And I knew it was going to be a lame ending. And I was like, guys, just give me something. Give me some, even like, you know, like the X-Files used to do, where even if you'd solve the case of like, it wasn't something weird, and they're like, but maybe it was, like, give me something like that, you know? I'll just go right down the middle and give it a 5 out of 10.
Fair
you know,
enough.
I'm giving, give it some time, but like, I've given you some okay scores now, guys. You got to really hit them out for the next couple episodes.
I totally agree. We all knew from square one, there's going to be no moon monster. So the show then had to have the execution of a big surprise. Like, whatever scientific thing they were going to find had to be a huge, interesting surprise. Like, oh, well, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Ice, moon ice. I'm like, no, sorry.
And also, you guys are scientists. You didn't know there was ice there? Like, how long have you been there? I'm assuming a while. Long enough that you built the base.
I guess I just haven't hung out there very long. I don't. Anyway, I'm gonna go 3. It was again it was a slog. Unfortunately, the show's a slog.
Yeah. It doesn't bode well for future episodes, because again, I think, again, to your point, this is the show they want to make. So I don't see them making any huge adjustments to it. Like, they might have some interesting themes, and again, I think actually both themes of these episodes are pretty interesting. And and I hate to always do it, but it did remind me of, something that Star Trek The Next Generation could have done pretty well, but probably would have done it in a more entertaining way,
Well, that's just the thing. If this is going to be the show, you better crank up the soap opera and the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
We better get really interested in what's happening. Are people fighting? Are they sleeping with each other? Like, is that stuff like happening on the but the character, like, there's the guy who riles up everybody about the moon monster. I don't even know his name. I don't know what his job is. I don't even know. I'm like, have I met this guy before? Like, it took me 4 scenes with him to be like, oh, is this the same guy? For like, just like, you guys got to like make these characters pop if you're going to do this dry stuff on these characters. Got to be sparkling. Like, I got to be so invested in them. And so that's the only thing I can think of that could improve. They could save the show. There's only 4 more episodes. It's only a 6-episode run, and obviously didn't get another series from the BBC. So we'll see.
Yeah, but not a great start. But I'll be honest, I am interested to see, because I feel like this is like high-minded. Like its goals are to be an intelligent, thought-provoking, grounded show. And I think your point is that you're like, maybe make a documentary, guys.
Exactly. I am just hoping we get some, if they can really lean into their special effects a bit more, then like at least that would occupy my eyes for a bit. So
yeah, I'll say one thing. I was reading about the show while I was watching, and like apparently that they didn't really know what they were doing in terms of like the moonwalking and stuff, and it was terrible on the actors. Like, the actors were just choking, and at one point one of them like almost suffocated in his suit because they forgot to put oxygen. Like, it was apparently like not fun being out on the moon. But I was like, it looked pretty good though.
It looks great. Yeah. I mean, they suffered, but it was worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode. So, listener, you can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you need to get a hold of us. And on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok, we will have clips from these episodes. Definitely get to see some of this good moon special effects. Moonquake, get a moonquake, get a moon explosion somewhere.
Yeah, and the original director blowing up.
I probably will put in, oh, that's bad.
I want to see that again, so I'm excited about that.
But yeah, you can find that. Our handle on social media is just Continuum Drag. You should be able to find us using that. And that wraps it up for the episode. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I will see you on the next one.
See you then.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.